Toshiko Mori. Toshiko dopo gli studi a Cooper Union a New York e a Columbia, è professore di pratica dell'architettura all'Harvard University e è stata co-guest editor di Domus l'anno scorso, nel 2023. La sua architettura è un'architettura elegantissima e soprattutto è un'architettura dell'ascolto e del dar voce alle marginalità e alle differenze. E stasera ci parlerà degli equilibri e ci parlerà di come i gesti di ascolto e di attenzione alle marginalità e alle differenze, appunto, sono di fortissimo impatto per un equilibrio che è un equilibrio ambientale, sociale e individuale. Quindi ho il piacere di chiamare Toshiko sul palco. E di ringraziarla di essere qua con noi. Grazie Toshiko.
Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Grazie. Buonasera a tutti. My last name is Italian, I heard, but I don't speak Italian, so I'm sorry, apologies. Oops. My title is called Balancing Act. And I was very excited to be invited to this conference named SEED, S-E-E-D, because I've been a farmer for the last 40 years. Actually, I own a farm in Maine and gardening for ages and making vegetables for my families, teaching my daughter and my grandchildren how to be a gardener. And I always say that architecture is more related to agriculture than industrial production. It's precisely because when you talk about seed, it's just not an object of a seed. What do you do with it? You have to have a very good terroir. You have to be cultivating the terroir. You have to be constantly nourishing it by fertilizing or giving water. So there's constant care that we need to do. Taking care of a seed is actually the work of an architect we don't speak about. So I get to talk about it. And I call this balancing act because balance itself is dynamic. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. It's always moving like life moves. It never stays in stasis. Equilibrium is a term for thermodynamics. When we achieve equilibrium, we actually end up in heat death. So this is a status we want to avoid. It's just not so easy to talk about equality as a static event, but I talk about balancing act as dynamic life-enforcing elements. And today, through some of the project, I will talk about how I had to work with this balancing act. First project is a Center for International Affairs and Public Policies, started by Thomas Watson, who's the founder of IBM. He was an ambassador to Russia during Cold War. He thought it's very important to find a safe place of dialogue among academia from different parts of the world, different parts of politics. Some of you might know Brown University, and I think you're more familiar with the setup of university, which is embedded in a residential neighborhood, which Brown is. And in order to balance this relationship with the neighbors, which creates a very nice and safe environment for students, you need to make sure that neighbors will have a good life. So urbanistically, I'm making connections, making elements of a campus more open or accessible, or provide some fast way of traveling through, or finding a new path. So those are some things that architects do in designing, which may not consider when you actually look at the proposing to university. We don't actually talk about it, but we talk to neighbors when we are planning it. and therefore to provide a new campus, which actually becomes a new garden space that neighbors and students can use alike. It's open to public. And also preserve existing building, which is a housing. A new building extends its arm around like, hey, you're a neighbor, you're part of us. You can stay, I can renovate inside, and we can make into classroom, but you still belong with us. And it makes a bridge which connects with old building with a new building. And this is a facade facing the neighborhood, which uses a similar material and similar size and scale to going together. Inside, I have worked on acoustic of a space. This public space, which is open to people in the neighborhood and also to students. I call it agora. Democracy is a spatial idea. It was originally founded by Greeks, and spatial definition is within the reach of human voice. And that's why acoustics of Greek theater is amazing. So in these circumstances, invisible design strategy was to work with Arab acoustics to make sure from anywhere in this particular agora, students can ask questions and they can be heard as an equal voice. And then speakers can speak there, but also they can be heard from multiple story or informally gathered students. So this is an example of a big area in which is a formal gathering, informal gathering. And this is a place I keep going back to because, as you can imagine, United States, the politics is very, very fractured. It's not even fractured. It's nearly broken. It's so divisive. And in this is about the only place students can come and really ask questions to Democrats and Republicans alike. And it's very important to have this safe place where voices are equal and they can exchange ideas and there will be nuanced opinions. You don't have to disagree all the time. You can agree partially, but the dialogue is so important for humanities to go ahead, and especially in terms of academia. And when there's no sessions, it becomes study spaces and community spaces. The second project I talk about is a master plan I've been working in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Central Library, Grand Army Plaza branch. And this shape is like an open book, but it faces a monument of a civil war. So by and large, a lot of institutions, especially public institutions in America, are very authoritarian. Library is supposed to be for people, but it's facing a war monument. So there's more gesture to that. So what Rahul was just talking about, what kind of face is that? It just has not a nice face to face the community, and how to change identity of these institutions. And my efforts has been series of renovations in this, and also to realign and rearrange its presence for new missions to come together. The first thing I did was to create information commons right off the library lobby. Brooklyn is a hip place, but it's actually a digital desert. There are many, many immigrants, many people lacking digital access. So first off, they can come, and then they will go into this place for digital access. And it's been now, this is when it was finished, but it's full of people, they have waiting list. And so that they have a robust digital connection for continuing work. Also, when you look at this, its community is facing the back. So the top arrow is entrance to children's library, which we are going to retain. It's close to communities. Mothers can bring kids into the place very easily. And there was no entrance on the bottom arrow. And even though it's closer to community, and next to it, the green space is a park. And then next to the right is actually Brooklyn Museum. No one knows they are connected. And so I made a new entrance, so what they call Civic Commons, which would change the program of library. This is where there's community meetings, and also where people can get passports and ID, and there are actually office spaces for local businesses that's taking place. And this space acts as a takeout place during COVID, during which library has been closed. But this was very active and open, of course, social distancing and things. So neighbors could live through the COVID without lack of books available to them at home. And I have to say that American public library systems are very, very important because its mission is to offer knowledge for free to everybody. And that means people feel safe. Mothers can bring kids to libraries, and they can let the kids go, and they can take out as many books as they want and go home and read and return it. It also works with a system of trust. Next project I did was the business library, proposing Brooklyn is a hub of startup business. But young people and also immigrants, they don't have a space for offices or the place for meeting. So they can book spaces, they can have meetings, and also they actually exchange information together. And there's also a seminar room to teach them how to make CVs or proposals. There's a training which they can, this has also been very much full of people. And thirdly, I made a space for the librarians, another marginalized community. If you go to the library, you don't think about librarians, but they are the knowledge navigators. I have to say, United States, you have been hearing a lot of falsehood being spoken, right? Lots of lies. Who's checking it? But they're actually librarians. So this is new and noteworthy. We elevated the status of librarians so they can be curating the books of a collection around a new book that arrives in a library, so that it empowers them, it makes them very visible. And I call them, they are the knowledge navigators. They will take you through the space of knowledge. And it's amazing how much they know, how to find which books, which references. They are one of the biggest resources in, at least in the United States. So I want to celebrate that. Again, in a way of balancing the human resources against what we don't know, making people visible who are not visible, but so resourceful and powerful. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we are going to connect it to the park next to it, so that one can make a connection of institutions between Brooklyn Public Library into a Brooklyn Botanical Garden and also into Brooklyn Museum. So there's actually a relationship of institutions being connected along the Eastern Parkway and Flatbush Avenue, which no one knows. It's very, very strange how disconnected these institutions are. So that's actually how the whole idea of neighborhood master plan would take place as we go. In renovation also, we made a historical interior where we made it very clean and glamorous. So the glamorous is very important. What I talked about is making a community here so that it's making a good terroir. As Andrea says, seed of this project is planting something, but it has to attract some butterflies and honeybees too. So this idea of making glamorous space attracted fashion designer to make a collection on the theme of this library and librarians. And also, it was a set for Netflix set for Holston's movie. It was paraded at Orly Airport, but it kind of looks like it. But also it does provide more income. This involvement with being glamorous, being attracting other parts, has a commercial benefit because libraries are public institutions. It depends on public funding and donations. So that making these spaces, which does attract this commercial venue, as attractive places or events and so forth is incredibly important ingredients, again, to balance invisibility versus visibility, as we know. So facade still looks like this. Raul will not approve this, of course. But last summer, the library invited Jay-Z, the hip-hop artist. Do you know him? Is he known? Yes? Yes, okay. Hip-hop artist from Brooklyn. He grew up in a housing project with single mother. As a youth, he has frequented this library. During COVID, he has collected a lot of his objects. So the library decided to do an exhibition of his work. Museum will never show his sneakers, but library can show his sneakers, his jerseys, and his record collections, his book collections as a youth, as a narrative, which is story, which is what library can tell. So that when we did that, Jay-Z decided to plaster his lyrics on the facade, which completely transformed the identity. It's not a friendly face, but people can read the lyrics. And all of a sudden, we are attracting people, especially African-American kids, who've never been frequenting a library. And when we did this exhibition, there were lines outside all summer long. We had to extend it all the way till last December for the people to come in. And when they show up, of course, they look at the library and says, I can get these books for free. I like to read the books Jay-Z used to read. Yes, it's available for you. So we are increasing a number of library users, and Jay-Z also issued a library card, about 8 of them, in a different record covers, and was distributed to different branches. And that actually attracted more kids, which became collector's items, but at the same time, it will make a more community. In a sense, it created a much more vibrant terroir or community base for this library. And the last 3, Jay-Z and his mom, they have a foundation. You have probably read that in America, there's a horrible thing going on about censorship of books for youth. In the schools in different states, some kids cannot read the books they want to read, especially affecting LGBTQ community of kids. So Jay-Z's foundation, Unbound Books, in which from this library, kids from all over the country can be members, and they can be shipped books they can't have in their own libraries. And I think those are the kind of important issues that we don't think of a role, but there's no choice but become activists to remedy this huge inequity which is existing in the country, United States. So that's the library story. Another story is about how do you actually do an art museum in a rural community, which is better known for lobsters. This is the lobster capital of the United States, Rockland. And I was asked to build a contemporary art museum. And in the case, Maine has always attracted many different artists over the centuries, but this town itself is more industrial, so the building has more industrial flavor, but we gave out a public space of open space in the middle so that town people can come and enjoy it. And most importantly for me was create a transparency so you know what's going on inside, who's in there, and can I go in? And this museum is free to local people. They can come in and out anytime they want. So this is a view, and it becomes a place of gathering. And many types of art installations, big installations, and most recently, this has just come down to a Moffett installation. So and over the years, this has been maybe several years, I also show these projects what happens after you design and build it. Because as an architect, I care about what I build. And I make sure that it's maintained well. And it actually continues its own life. And so one way or the other, I help them organize it or recommend something. And that's me being a farmer. I have to keep watering plants, watering my buildings, bringing my grandchild to the art. That's my granddaughter. I'm like, so in a way, after these several years, they won an award for attracting most number of tourists. And it generated $10 million of tourist income in the state of Maine, which is not a small feat. And this town became art capital of the state of Maine. And because living cost is very low, it's attracting many people. An art lab here is free for adults and seniors and kids. And the major thing about this lab is that it has a lot of art supplies. Some families in this town can't afford to buy crayons, and then kids don't use it. So the idea is that mothers bring kids there, and they'll try out what they like, and then they can selectively purchase what's good for the kids. So this is kind of public service idea. The last part of my talk is about Senegal project, 2 projects in Senegal. And also, both projects are not new, but precisely because it's not new, I like to talk about it, because it's about the effect of what you do. What kind of changes did it actually result in? And how did your imagination of what you're providing might be right or wrong or very different from how it turned out? It's in Tambacounda, which is about a 7-hour drive from Dakar. It's sponsored by Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, United States. And I think many of you know Joseph and Annie Albers. They have escaped Nazi Germany. They were refugees themselves. So they founded a foundation in the 1970s for people who do not have means to support themselves or who are actually challenged in the circumstances they have from the income they produce from sales of their artwork. This is a very small community in Xinjiang, and Albers Foundation has been operating medical center here and nearby, about 8 of them for the last 25 years. And this is the area with highest rate of maternal mortality and also highest rate of infant mortality. And Western medicine has been considered to be very suspicious, as you can imagine. And Senegal is a Muslim community, 90% Muslim. So they have, when you talk about family, there's about 40 people. And every time there's a patient, they all have to come, and it took them nearly 2 decades to gain the trust of a community to have this thriving medical community going. This is a landscape of what it looks like. Dry area, but it has greens. It has rain season because of it. These are the people, very artistic, very wonderful kids, beautiful people. And they are of different tribes. At least they speak 12 different languages. And through performance and arts, they communicate with each other. And this clinic in particular, they have produced kits to go through different villages to inform them about having mosquito nets to prevent malaria spread and so forth. So arts is part of the blood. And Dr. Mageba on White, he's a doctor, village doctor, who's been running this clinic. He was a youth when Albers Foundation founded their work in this area. And he went to medical school, came back to the village with the conviction that he has to keep the population there to be stable. And he also said that on onset of extremism in Muslim culture, that culture needs to be protected. And he's the one proposed to have a cultural center called Thread, which I was commissioned to do, work with them. And I have to say, I've done research with my Harvard students in this area. I've met people, and also economically speaking, similar kind of fee I would ask is about equivalent of 40 people's 1 year salary. So I don't suggest everyone to do pro bono all the time, but this is a pro bono work I chose to do and work together, because also I was learning quite a bit about it, and this is an existing clinic. And what I found out is that because of climate change, aquifer is drying. If somebody digs a well, the next village dries up. But there was no strategy for retaining rainwater because this area did not require it. It was very rich in aquifer. And last project I talked about is not so far the other part of other side of a river, but they actually still have abundant aquifer, but this area not. So the idea is to come up with a center with which we can collect rainwater. And Dr. Mageba did analysis with us to figure out exact water usage of goats and donkeys and cows and horses and people, what they used to wash, going from door to door, about 700 villagers. It was very good, and I have to say, I don't think we have that data in New York City. I think some cities have it. I do know Singapore has it. I think maybe Helsinki, maybe Milan, you guys have it, but it's actually a very important information just because we are too used to abundance of water. But through that, we figured out that we can supply about 30% of village use. And we have a canal system that goes in there, and then there are ponds that keeps rainwater in it. That's the plan of it. And it's the site plan, it's going to be situated here. But the idea came from African hut. And as you can imagine, there's no precedent for architecture in such places, especially rural area. The colonialization of what took over in Dakar and metropolitan cities didn't exist. So we took this prototype and worked with Schreiss Bergmann's office in Stuttgart, engineer, who's familiar with the building with bamboo through their researches in their work in Southeast Asia, to come up with a public building, large building, which is oversized African hut. And one of the important things about it is it will be familiar to them. It's larger, familiar material, familiar technique, and also it employs people who build their communities. It's within the skill set they can actually accomplish it. We did a very detailed computer analysis, and we really make it much more simpler, make diagrams for people so they can able to build sequentially, such as this one. This ring goes first, this goes second, and the third, so sequential. It's more like, how do I say, diagram for dance steps, which they respond very well because in fact they're actually dancing, they actually drum. There's a music when the construction goes on, so this idea of not doing working drawings, but doing a type of documents that people can actually understand and use to go over this building. And amazingly, they have done a beautiful, precise work of this choreography that we have created with a structural engineer, and those are local such makers. And because of curvature, I don't have to explain to the audience how efficient the curvilinear forms are in terms of capacity for low capacity. But also we worked with thatch makers very closely so that rain drainage is proper. Because they are actually, my first designs were rejected because it's just going to retain, it's going to rot the roof, you can't do it. So there's lots of going back and forth between people who are actually building and model making, a lot of texting together, and a lot of site visit to accomplish it. They're also looking at Annie Arber's work, in which she is a weaver, amazing weaver, and she has had exhibition in Tate Modern and also Bilbao recently. And they're looking at this example and made their thatch much more denser than they usually used to, which added insulation value, as well as the straws, they have directionality. So they actually promotes drainage much more than any membrane materials. It's very interesting. So one of the things about thatch is the material they're used to work with, and they're familiar with it. But the wisdom of thatch is that it's porous still, so that there's actually ventilation that can go through, but dense enough to prevent water from coming in, but let the water drain on its surface. There's incredible wisdom about this going on. So this is a master thatch maker that I worked on, and this is a process in which how they do much more dense thatch than what they're used to, which makes inside much more cooler, which is not surprising, but in a sense, when you are inside, you don't really expect thatch or straws to do such a power, but it does. And bricks are mud bricks built during dry season manually by the community, and they get dried, and using the mud of the land, and they have a proper alkali content which we checked so that it has a structural capacity that's associated with it. And they looked at example of arbusts, Joseph arbors, and different patterning that allows them to do ventilation, but also privacy. And also I worked with the indigenous knowledge in which this is brilliant brick they have, which prevents sandstone from coming into inner space. What it does is that sandstone will hit the slope surface, it will come down outside, so it will never have sand in it. And all these years, this is about several years, they have never experienced sand coming into any of the interior spaces. And this is not me, it's actually working, it's their own knowledge. So that's actually working with the inner knowledge of what the community does best and working together. But with our birth ideas, we were able to come up with this brick pattern facade, which provides privacy, but also provides ventilation. So when I'm talking about this idea of mixing references such as arbors idea, this is arbors, one of the earliest arbors, what you call glass painting. He was not very wealthy. I would say he was very poor. So when he was a student in Bauhaus, he was rummaging through the garbage of Bauhaus and made this one of the first paintings. So this whole story appealed to them very much because he said they would always rummage through the broken tiles. There's actually a technique of using broken tile, which is given by construction companies in Dakar, in which they would use to make beautiful mosaics on their own. So this is a technique of DIY, but also indigenous art form that we were able to incorporate into it. And this is actually making some work around it. Idea for this building and next building, for me was most difficult challenge has been, we as an architect coming from, not from this place, what are we doing imposing an idea on them? So I was very, very careful about how they build, what they are familiar with, and then how they can keep maintaining it, how they can develop this building into a next generation that will benefit the community instead of just being like photographed by Ivan Ban, being published in Domas, I'm sorry, Walter, and end of a story. I didn't want that at all. So this is a continuous story, and there's a library for women to be working through, and at night the kids come in, there's a solar panel there so that there's electricity. Kids will come and do homework in there, so it's multi-generational. We had 2 halls in the central area for men and women, because as you know, in Muslim community, they do not do practice or do activities together. So I was told we have to have 2 courtyards, but that wasn't the case here. They are always intermingling together. It's a progressive Muslim community, but also intergenerational, from kids to elders to young people, they're always there. And residents also include, also this function is actually artist residence. And there are 2 residents in there. And residents come from nearby village. There are rappers from nearby village. And residents at one time is nuns from Christian village next door. They taught women how to make soaps, which really saved them during a COVID time, because they knew how to make soaps, and they were able to sell it too to other villages. And the idea is to be open and also to be able to practice together, and also international artists. Yeah, we all know international artists going there. It's become very, very popular fellowship program, and they can house 2 people, from musicians to filmmakers to artists to, it's been quite a vibrant idea. And it's been maintained by a rotating group of women from different villages to balance out the workload that's going to different communities, and they've been working together. But also in terms of women, how they use the water which was procured by the roof was, I didn't have a control over it. But women got together and decided to make gardens, to grow vegetables, to sell them, and also to give them to the families. So it improved public health issue, nutritional values for the villages, but also gave them income. So in this area, about equivalent to about $10 US can get a kid to a school for 1 year. So it's a very big issue, and Women's Collective is very powerful, and they have been thriving. And I have to say, it's actually something I learned. It's that it's in dry climate, you have to control irrigation more than in abundant water. So by controlling it, you can actually do a better management of resources. And they actually very selectively have plants and vegetables which is more valuable. That's going through, like okra and eggplants and peppers. And also they have moringa, which is a herb, highly priced herb, which grows there, which is African herb, rich in nutrients. It has protein, antioxidant. So they've been selling this moringa, and in fact, they have now a bee population. They make honey, and also they make fonio, which is an ancient grain, gluten-free ancient grain, which they have funded from a Senegalese government to plant it. So this has been an example for what's been going on in this, going back. And now the outside, they became a soccer field for kids. They do national, regional tournaments there. So this is great, but it's not great for me, because to do a thatch roof, you have to secure enough grass so they can repair it. And I was like, it's great for soccer field, what happens to the thatch? Oh, they were, so they are going to plant it elsewhere. They have, so all this balancing act of, yes, it's great, but in a sense, you have to make sure to secure the field of wildly growing grass to keep repairing, replacing thatch. They just replaced some of the thatch roof. The last project I talk about is offshoot of thread, and when we opened it, people from this village called Fast came and asked us to design an elementary school. It's much more drier place, and it's much more conservative in terms of religious background, but they're open. There are also Christians living nearby. But it took about 3 years to convince them to do a secular education program. It's because they didn't think that it's actually the wish of elders to divert from religious community teaching. But elders quickly realized that a combination of ignorance and poverty is lethal for the future of a youth, that they have to learn arithmetic, they have to learn to read and write, so they wouldn't sign up with ISIS contract, not knowing what they signed up for and so forth. So those things are happening. And also carpentry skills, cooking skills, and basic health knowledge, and so forth. So the plan is a circle, And again, I talked about familiarity. I took, from example, ancient Mori family dwelling near there, which is much bigger than African hut. So this donut-shaped shape is much smaller, is again familiar, but also we worked with Schreiss Bergman to come up with structurally efficient large public school structures here. And the section is very different, 1 to 5, 6, so that none of the classrooms are the same. The problem with Senegalese public school is that it's made out of concrete blocks and corrugated metal. So what that means is that in the hot weather, the kids get cooked underneath, and then in rainy weather, they can't hear the lessons. It's very noisy with rainwater, so the kids don't want to go to school, or they study outside of it, which is very unfortunate. And this, again, I talked about being in a thatch structure allows them insulation, and also it allows slow ventilation, which, because of a stack effect, is naturally ventilated. And this is my proud team, mon équipe in French, as we call it. And this is the same team which worked in thread, and they take a boat to come across and taught the locals how to build a school. So there is also, in terms of balancing skill set, but they have done these buildings before, so I think they're actually building more buildings on their own, which is okay with me. So there's certain knowledge built in this community by working on the skill sets of together. So the kids there, it's about 4 years, and every year there are about 200 kids signed up, coming from many places around it. And I think they have to walk there or bike there, and it's from ages 6 to 12, both boys and girls. We insisted the boys and girls need to be educated together, and then we have to include kids of other religious background. So the Christian kids come. They actually go into Quran lessons, which is okay, and then about learning about each other. This is a classroom. We designed all the furniture from steel rebars and plywoods. And one of the interesting phenomenal aspect about the life in the village is that they're used to living in a hut, African hut, which is dark inside, or they are outdoors. There was no notion of really living in a shade in between space, which gives them coolness. So that was very new to them, and but in a way, it actually promoted life outside. Some kids are sitting in the shade there. And this particular compound, because of a roof, is about 10 degrees cooler. So the kids, it does attract kids. It doesn't matter what the reason is. If they are able to stay there and then attracted, keep coming back and feel comfortable in terms of environment for them to study, that will be the aspects that, as an architect, I'll be very interested in promoting. And this is the last slide, and I like to say that, yes, we have a school, and this is a big school. We call it Maison École, schoolhouse. And we say that, yes, it's a big institution, school, but it's a house, it's a big house. And you have kids from many different communities coming, and you're learning together, which means you're going to have new families and friends together. And also imbalance of this large institution versus those little kids. As an architect, we're so used to working for institutions all the time because they pay us fees, right? But what we have to focus on are the constituents, those kids, because their future will depend upon what we do in spaces. And if they're able to come to classes every day and learn lessons, and then they will be empowered. And so those are the things I think about balancing all the time. If I have any choice as an architect, and if you have choice anytime, is to empower the marginalized, the voiceless, the invisible. That's about the way we can actually improve the world and making the balance, dynamic balance possible. So thank you very much.